Oh, we're live. Hi, Apoorva. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, Grace. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, to start the show, I would love for the audience to learn more about you. So obviously you have went to IIT and then Wharton, and then you started your career in Lightspeed as an investor. So you before that you were a consultant, but like after that, your first venture career was like with Lightspeed, and then you have founded your own company, and now you're a partner at Zetta Venture Partners. And so why don't we start with, what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that you have took like later on to run the VC firm?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, there have been different lessons from different phases of life. Um,
Mhm,
I would say that as a student and as a student at IIT, one of the lessons, and even before getting into IIT, one of the
mhm,
lessons was to like focus, learn how to focus, and when you're focused, learn how to be persistent. So I think one of the things that
mhm,
like we learn even in as an entrepreneur is that you have like so many things, so many moving parts, but you have to kind of figure out like what your focus areas are, and you have to drive them all the way through. So
mhm,
persistence matters most, and I know that you can run into the wall many times, and like I think one of the hardest things about like getting into IIT is the exam itself, and is kind of
mhm,
the amount of work that you need to do to get through. So I would say that was the initial learning lesson of being like focused and persistent. But then over the years, like through different roles, there've been obviously multitude of lessons. I would say from my days at Lightspeed, I think I got exposure to very interestingly opportunities both in the India market as well as the US market as well as the Israel market. At that time, Lightspeed was investing through the Global Fund, so you could
mhm,
actually see what was happening across markets. And you could actually see what works across markets, what kind of founders are successful, and one of the lessons at that time, or a few lessons at that time, one was think beyond technology. I think obviously every
mhm,
VC, or especially me, coming from a technical background, is very excited about deeply technical founders. But what I've learned over time and realized over time is technology matters, uh, technical insights matter, but at the same time, being really product centric, really understanding what the customer's pain point is, what the early shape of the product is, and how that shape evolves matters as much or even more. And I think that I learned both through the vantage point of Lightspeed as well as some of my early ventures as a founder as well as an operator, that like being product centric beyond understanding and appreciating
mhm,
technology and having those technical insights is truly novel in a founder. And it's not only about building, and it's not only about like figuring out technology and product. It's also about having the right mental models of how do you take this to market. Obviously those mental models change for consumer or for enterprise. I'm talking from the more from the vantage point of enterprises, where uh, a lot of founders start, and when we invest in these companies, we are investing pre-product, we are investing in the market pain point, and we are investing in ideas.
mhm,
And it's hard to know at that point that what the right go-to-market should be. But a lot of successful founders, at least what I saw through the lens of Lightspeed and even at Foundation and now at Zetta, uh, are those that are able to have hypothesis around what the go-to-market channels look like, what
mhm,
those approaches look like, and they're able to test them over time. And they don't start from a clean slate when they raise capital. Uh,
mhm,
that's what gives them a head start in the market. That they've already thought through a lot of things. They've already spoken to enough people to know how this could get to market. And they might prove or disprove those hypotheses over time, but having those mental models is really important. Um,
mhm,
and then going forward, since you asked me about lessons throughout, there have been more lessons through the lens of my experience at startups as well. So when I used to be at this company called Quid, which was early in the NLP journey. Think of this as kind of the pre-transformer days. At that time, they were taking unsupervised learning to neural nets, and commercializing a product in the market. And at that point, one of the core lessons that I learned was uh, it's again, one piece was, again, the way I described it, it's technology. But what does this mean in terms of product? And just to take it to market, we had to verticalize the solution to be able to like figure out use cases and what that product means for the end user. The other piece, which is also relevant in today's market, is like as AI is taking over, we know that a lot of these products that are being built are to a certain extent demos, and we want these products to be fully functional agents and hopefully autonomous agents in the future. But we have somewhat like less functional agents for now and less functional models for now. How do you make the most use of that? And I think a lot of founders, or at least a lot of investors, do want to invest in self-serve products that you could literally put it in the hands of the users and it works. But what I learned from Quid, my days at Quid, or even now, is that if AI can help you achieve 70 to 80% of your pain point, or can create a solution to address 70 to 80% of what you need, at the end of the day, customers are looking for outcomes. So if you can like plug the last mile, and Palantir did a great job with that and continues to do a great job with that, with forward deployed engineers that focus on the last mile and really provide great outcomes for end customers. I think that's what a lot of companies should also like focus on doing, which is focus on providing great outcomes for their customers so that they don't have to worry about reliability, they don't have to worry about quality, they don't have to worry about effectiveness of the outcome, and that's taken care of by the vendor. Whether the product or the AI addresses 50% of that, 70% of that, or 100% of that, initially margins might be low, but you'll definitely gain customer NPS. Customers will really like what you're doing. You'll gain their trust, and over time, you could productize more and more of that application. So I think those are kind of couple of like nuggets all over the place, just because you asked for learnings across my journey, and there are many more, but I'll pause there.
Totally. I completely hear you on like, having persistent and then like being product focus is like really important. And I want to maybe start before diving into a lot of like the AI trends, which is like one of our main focus today. I want to maybe start with like, since like you like we have chatted about like, you joined like Zetta Ventures partners because of like you really like the focus and like, it's AI driven. And then you guys have been investing in AI for since like 2015. And I want to maybe start with like, can you give the audience a little bit background on Zeta Venture Partners, and then we can dive into the trends in AI.
Sure. Yeah. So Zetta has been around for close to a decade. It was
Mhm,
founded back in 2013 as a data and ML. That time, like
mhm,
there was Gen AI, there was more classical ML. So it was founded as a data and ML focused fund, and it was founded by my partner Mark Grenberg, who's been in venture for like 3+ decades.
mhm,
At that time, the reason for founding Zetta was that he believed that the next generation of companies would be data and algorithms enabled. Uh,
mhm,
as software is becoming commodity. And he
mhm,
called it Zetta because it's named after the zettabyte of data that crossed the internet that year.
mhm,
And since then, we've invested across different phases of AI, from classical ML to deep learning to computer vision to now Gen AI. And the current
mhm,
fund is a $180 million fund. And we are leading or co-leading inception stage rounds. Now, inception is a nebulous term. So we could do pre-seed, seeds, or pre-A rounds. Check sizes anywhere from like 1 to 5 mil. And the idea is to like more than 80 to 90% of our investments are actually pre-product. In fact, we even like to help the founders ideate, figure out what
mhm,
idea they want to focus on, and potentially also help them incorporate the company. And after that, be the first check in the company. And broadly invest in three areas. One is the entire stack of AI ML, from infra to applications. The infra layer has changed from classical ML to Gen AI today. But on the application side, we're looking at both horizontal applications as well as verticalized applications. And I would say one thing about applications, that it's not just about incrementally improving incumbent solutions over there. We strongly believe that applications should be net new. And I can talk about that in the trends.
mhm,
The other is data infrastructure. And the third is intersection of developer tools and security. And I would call data infrastructure and dev tools and security as kind of the enablers to make a company AI and ML ready. So that's kind of the entire ecosystem of tools. Just to also, I'll also mention like few companies so that at least people know of like what companies we've invested in. We were early investors in Domo, which went public back in the day, early in Domino Data Labs, which is the dominant platform for data scientists. We're still on the board of the company. Kaggle, which was acquired by Google. On the application side, we back companies like Tractable, Lilt, and Clearbit, acquired by HubSpot. And on the GenAI side, we're fortunate to be in some of the leading technologies on the infra side. So companies like BB8, which is the biggest open source vector database, or companies like Guardrails AI, which is in the AI assurance space. Also on the data infra side, we've backed companies like Tabular, which was just acquired by Databricks, or companies like Motherduck and Gable, to name a few.
Totally. I feel like that's like I feel like 10 years ago, that's like a really great vision to have like for the AIML/data space. And I want to start with, like since you mentioned about like a certain areas that you guys are interested in investing in, I want to start with like, I read about like US 2024 prediction, which was including AI native applications and LLM will transform data stack and the new data will like unbundle the data stack.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about in 2025? Do you have like any predictions for that? And then we can dive into the subset.
Yeah, totally. So the way I kind of just to give context on the entire stack first, and then I can talk about like certain areas that I have predictions on. Very broadly, as a seed stage fund, we avoid being in capital intensive businesses. So avoiding the compute layer, avoiding the LLM model layer, as well as avoiding the full stack layer of applications that are building generalized models. And we've seen like a lot of companies that have kind of fall in that category of like these full stack applications, companies like Inflection and others that have had to raise a lot of capital just because they've ended up building their own models from scratch. But in terms of like the areas that I'm excited about going forward, so just going up the stack in areas that are asset light and areas that are like well suited for early stage venture, I would say like on the data layer, we've been like very active, and I still feel there's a lot to be done in the data layer. I think we saw like companies like Tabular, companies like Motherduck stand for certain trends, and these have become trends today. But at that time, they saw opportunities, and the opportunities that they saw, which are still true, is that the data is to a certain extent being thrown into the warehouse in a lot of companies, even though it doesn't have to be, and that's leading to increased cost of owning data and storing data and using data. And then downstream of the warehouse, there's so many multiple layers of transformation that are coming up. That is that was kind of the promise and kind of the challenges with the modern data stack, which no one wants to like use the term modern data stack anymore. But the challenges were that like as things were moving away from ETL to ALT, which is like throwing data, all kinds of data into the warehouse, people were just figuring out the quality, the transformation of the data as an afterthought, and that worked to a certain extent, but it also worked mostly for BI and less for AI workloads. But after a while, there was a realization that because of this complexity, it's you need to add more people to the mix on your data team, because they need to figure out each of these layers of the stack. The cost of data was going up, and despite doing all of these things, you still didn't get the quality of data that you were hoping to get. And the reason for that is if you don't know upfront what that quality should be, what those entities should be, what that metadata should be, you can't fetch that as an afterthought. So producers of data need to know what kind of data to fetch right from the beginning, and what kind of data to provide to the end users based on their use cases. That's when this idea of like these signals came around, and trends around both unbundling the stack as well as things around small data ended up becoming like more prominent. One theory behind like unbundling the stack was a lot of customers don't really want their data to be in the warehouse. They just want it to be in R2 and S3 and kind of their source itself, so that it's like not costly and they should be able to use it from the source itself. So I feel there's still this movement, and my prediction is that that movement is going to become stronger in next year. We've seen like some companies getting momentum. We obviously saw Iceberg became a really promising technology in that domain. But there is still, we see kind of these two big companies, Snowflake and Databricks, that are these end-to-end companies that are trying to own everything and are also competing with each other. But at the end of the day, there is an opportunity to kind of for both customers and vendors to create an ecosystem of tools that enables them to keep the data free, keep it in the lake, and use it for their use cases, and don't always have to kind of work through the data through a centralized workflow, because that slows things down, that makes it more expensive, and it reduces flexibility of the tooling that you can use. So I feel that there's a lot more to happen on that piece of the stack, where I just there are fewer technologies today, and none of the products have become as big yet. So that's one. The second is this movement around AI. So with like newer AI workloads coming up, and this is like Gen AI workloads where data is unstructured as well as you. The interesting question is that today the tooling around data are still in silos. There are tools for unstructured data. There are tools for structured data, and as data is becoming multimodal, like today, the idea of unstructured data for a long time was text, but it's going beyond text. It's going to like audio, video, and other modalities of data as well. So as companies evolve the use of the data across the board, how do you create technologies or products or data primitives, like I like to say, that combine all these different kinds of data together and are able to, you can use it for BI and for your AI workloads. And I think I'm excited about those kinds of technologies. Now, historically, we've seen companies like Scale AI and Labelbox, which have taken data, curated the data, and given back to the organization to be usable for their AI workloads. And a lot of that workflow was labeling, and a lot of that labeling was done by human labelers. So the interesting opportunity today is like how do you shift the kind of control in the hands of AI practitioners themselves? How do you hand them tools like we've handed them infra tools for piecing the models together and plugging them into applications? How do we provide them tools so that they are able to like make sense of the data themselves? They are able to like just combine structured and unstructured data themselves. They are able to visualize that data themselves. They are able to clean up that data and plug it into their workflow without much overhead. And I think that's an opportunity that I'm excited about on the AI side. But those are like few examples on the data side. If I go to the application layer, we've been, and I kind of alluded to this some time back, which is we want to invest in applications that are net new. What that means is there is a lot of incumbent products that are being sold in the enterprise, both for horizontal use cases as well as verticalized use cases. And to give you examples, like a horizontal product, which is more functional, is a company like Salesforce in the sales space. Whereas if you get like verticalized products, there are verticalized products being built for healthcare, bio, retail, and so on. So the idea for investing in AI applications is not to, I think it's hard to replace these incumbent products on day zero, although I feel like there could be better experiences over time, even with these incumbent approaches. But the benefit of AI is that both incumbents and startups are benefiting in the same way, because incumbents are incorporating a lot of these technologies and making their end user experience better, and they're able to like collect a lot of data to be able to like hopefully train models or even apply some of these models for their end customers. But when you look at the startup opportunity, I believe, and we all believe, it's more on those use cases and those workflows that are not deterministic, because a lot of things that these incumbents have been able to address are deterministic workloads. And I think it's not a good use of a stochastic technology. Now, I think of AI as stochastic. It's always not reliable, but that's okay to kind of put in a situation or address use cases that have been manual, that have been bespoke, that have been hard to be addressed by incumbent SaaS approaches, because those approaches have been one size fits all. Versus these new approaches can be really, really ground up and really address those bespoke areas. One example for that is that comes to mind is we've backed a company that is creating an autonomous IT engineer.
Mhm.
And that's the vision. Obviously, you can't
Mhm.
start there. Where do you start? So they've picked up a workflow or an approach that has been very bespoke, that has been very custom to every organization, and is
Mhm.
always being done by services,
Mhm.
and couldn't be done by like standardized products in the past. And so we are not taking any budget from incumbents away. We are only taking budgets away from FTEs, and maybe not taking budget away from them, because it's like augmenting what an FTE can do and helping them do it faster.
Mhm.
So rather than like hiring many more people to do that work, you can hire lesser number of people and augment them with this agent to be able to do it faster. And what this company started to do early on is to create an agent for automating the IT integration workflow, right from designing the IT integrations to authoring them to integrating them in your CI/CD workflow. A lot of that entire workflow was being done by system integrators, which is a pretty long process that they were reinventing. They are, and they continue to reinvent the wheel around how they deploy system integrations for whether it's Salesforce, whether it's SAP, not just for when these companies and products are introduced in an organization, but also when any updates happen. You go back and it kind of again reinvent the wheel around how these things are created. But if you can, and this is very bespoke and custom to every organization. It's not like a standard thing that you do for every organization. So it's not deterministic. That's where if you can apply AI, you can tap into existing budgets. You can really provide a lot of value to both the users as well as the end organizations, and they're excited about paying for it. As an example.
For sure. I like the last part. Like, since we were just chatting about like the autonomous IT engineering company. So you mentioned about like, it can tap into the existing budget, and then like it kind of like, instead of like just having the AI do everything, it just like kind of reduce a lot of workflow for the human basically. So you need less people and saves more money. And in terms of like thinking about a company's like from a business angle, so obviously you have invested in a lot of like companies in the space. And I wonder, since like we chat about like, early on we chat about like, unbundling the data stack, or like the modern data stack, or like unbundling the Snowflake of the world, or the, I guess, like deconstruct the modern data stack. So among the subsectors in that category, which one would you say should the startups go first to tackle on? Just because like which part have like the most amount of money? Would it be, let's say, cloud first architecture, or like build around like cloud data warehouse or data lakes, and like, or like which part of the deconstruction or the data stack that you feel like should be upgrade first, and like where is like kind of like the, how does the money flow in the industry?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because when you're deconstructing, or at least decoupling, I shouldn't call it deconstructing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because one of the things that at least what Iceberg did was enable the data to be open. Now, when the data is open, you could actually keep it wherever you want to keep it. Now, the big question is, do you as an organization, as an SMB or as an enterprise, want to do the hard work of creating all the layers on top of that data to provide you with the right security, to provide you with the right access controls,
Mhm,
to provide you with the right kind of flexibility of using
mhm,
different kinds of tools. Obviously, people like that, but at the end of the day, there's still hard work required. So, do you build versus buy? And maybe a lot of organizations will build, and I would say the forward-thinking organizations that have the technical capacity internally will build. But I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity on the buy side. And I think one of the things that uh, which is still an open opportunity in my opinion, is this idea of like neutral storage or cataloging on that side, which is like if you have your data in different stores, whether it's in your database or it's in your S3 or it's in your R2 or wherever it might be, um, who's kind of providing the cataloging of that data, who's kind of giving the access controls around it, so that like you're able to, both your data teams as well as your security teams know exactly how different people in the organization are getting access to that data. Because at least with the promise of a centralized approach is that you are controlling that in a centralized way, versus if you are decentralizing it to a large extent, it's hard to control it. And so there is a big opportunity in that side, which is, I would say, the neutral storage, the neutral cataloging opportunity, the access control piece around that, and I think that's an interesting starting point. The other opportunity that I would say is more around creating pipelines. I think we've seen Fivetran uh, be a pretty fundamental piece of like ETL or ELT technology for the modern data stack in the past. Like what kind of replaces that in the future? And maybe it's not replacement, maybe it's like people continue to use Fivetran and they continue to use that in different unique ways, or people continue to use Airbyte as well, because Airbyte is open source, and people will try and like figure out how to use that in conjunction with other compute layers on top. But there is definitely a lot of work required to be able to create a pipeline and bundle that with and do the orchestration piece of that, which for which people are using Airflows of the world. And on top of that, combining that with Spark jobs, and it's not a trivial thing. So there could be compute first pipelines as well in that zip code that need to be managed, that need to exist. And I think that's another opportunity that exists over there. So I can keep talking about different opportunities on that side, but I also feel that one of the big things on that side, which I haven't mentioned but I should, is this ability to kind of look at the relationships between your data, which is unstructured, which
Mhm.
lies in different kinds of stores, as well as your structured data, which has been kind of the core data that's been used in the past. And as things are becoming multimodal, how do you get a sense of, when you are doing your analytics or you're creating AI applications on specific entities, how do you correlate like what that entity stands for from the structured source versus the unstructured source? And you should be able to, it should be automatically be able to infer those relationships. And then there's this emerging idea of a knowledge graph or a knowledge database on that side. And you don't have to, like, historically I remember when I was in Quid days, we had to create these ontologies for different industries that based on like all the data that we were collecting. I think the beauty of like the technologies that are coming up today is that you don't have to create those ontologies. Those ontologies could be inferred based on the underlying data sets. So I think that's another area which I think people are working on, and I think technology has to emerge that becomes standard, and it becomes more standard when unstructured data and structured data end up being used together more often for different use cases. And I think that's happening. That's started to happen. It's not going to be in silos anymore. So an example that I give is when you watch a movie, you just don't watch the characters, you just don't read subtitles. You kind of watch and consume everything: the voice, the picture, the subtitles, all at once. And I think that's the future experience in a kind of every world that companies will benefit from, that consumers will benefit from. And there need to be technologies that kind of cross the stack, that need to manage multimodality.
Oh, okay. So I wonder also, since you mentioned about like the multimodal aspect of things, like so like in the future, would you imagine like the enterprise just like dump all the data into one, two, or like you also mentioned about like the stack, like, a company kind of take over this thing. So like, I wonder, how does the enterprise experience kind of gonna be looking like for someone who's like handling the data? Would it be like, let's call it like the CTO just partner with one company, and then like, here's all of our customer data. Let's call it like, let's say you're running a fintech company, and then here's all the, um, people's data about their bank account or like everything else. And then maybe here's like our Instagram account, and there's like, we made tutorial on the X, Y, and Z. And can you like, leveraging our existing content into answering customer questions? Or would you imagine like for each small steps, like there's still going to be like 1,000 different companies doing 1,000 different things?
The market always goes through these pendulum swings between consolidated and fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever new workloads come up, like things become fragmented, best of breed solutions. And over time, as those things become more mainstream, people want simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that SMBs always need simplicity because they don't want to pay for multiple solutions. They are bandwidth constrained, and they want like a full stack solution for a lot of things. I would say enterprises, different teams use different things, so there's still choice based on like what products each team wants to use. And that choice still exists, right? Even in things that are more mature. Look at the software delivery workflow. There's all the different parts of the SDLC. If you look at a big enterprise, different teams still continue to use different products
Mm-hmm.
uh, for CI, for CD, for even for build environments. There are different teams using different things. So I would argue that like bigger companies, it still goes back to the choice of the team
Mm-hmm.
and their application, because a lot of organizations are structured as hub and spoke. Hub is kind of the infra that takes decision for the rest of the organization. Spokes are the application areas, and those application areas have developers, have data scientists, have ML folks, and have application engineers, like focusing on that business use case.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say like maybe those spokes continue to use the best of breed tools that resonate with them. But at the end of the day, the infra or the central platform teams will have to evolve to a point where they are not just focused on structured data only or
Mm-hmm.
classic ML only. I think that reorg is still continuing to happen in organizations where the platform teams are trying to figure out like how to adopt like platforms that can be scalable, but that can also work with different kinds of data. That can work for both classical ML as well as for GenAI workloads.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that shift is still happening. And I think the future will look like that, where hopefully the platform teams will adopt things, and hopefully there will be vendors that can be scaled across the organization for a lot of basic things. But in enterprises, those spokes, those arms, those business unit teams will continue to use their own tools of choice. Now all goes back to like for what kind of tools of choice. So I did mention things around better data curation, but focused more on the end user. If at any point, if you have to like hand out the data external to the organization, the central teams get involved. But if ICs, if users are able to like use tools and products themselves, which and use it within their environments, then there's an opportunity to kind of be flexible and use what you want to use. So I think that's how I see the evolution happen. But that's exactly one of the reasons why a lot of vendors today are in flux. They are trying to figure out, like, look at even uh, the GenAI eval side or the observability side. There were like there are different waves of eval that came. Obviously, there's the observability wave around classical software delivery, which is companies like Datadog, New Relic, Honeycomb, and so on. Then came this wave around observing ML, companies like Arise and Fiddler and so on. And now there is this new wave of like GenAI observability, which is do the incumbents do that better, or would the GenAI companies kind of manage the newer workloads and the older workloads? So there will be consolidation, because you can't really afford to have like five different players for different workloads as those workloads combine. So I feel the platform teams will have to evolve to do that better and to kind of consolidate that in a certain way. But if different spoke teams that are deploying their Gen AI applications want to use a different vector database or want to use a different RAG approach, or they want to use a different AI assurance technique before they put things in production where observability happens, they can continue to do that. There'll be flexibility around that. So I think that's how the trade-offs will play out, in my opinion, but it's still early to call that.
Mm, wow. I love that. So like I totally agree with you on like, it's all about like I feel like it's bundling and bundling throughout the times.
Yeah.
And I wonder, quickly saying hi to the audience. Hi, Samid. Hi, Sahad. Sahaj? Oh, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. But anyway, so I wonder when it comes to thinking about, let's say from an enterprise perspective, let's say like if I'm like the chief information officer of an airline company, so like how should I incorporate AI into my stack right now? And then what does a stack kind of look like right now? Do I build like the entire infrastructure in house, or like do I leverage like a data infra company outside kind of doing the white label thing? And then one thing I found really interesting about Skill AI is like, as you mentioned, like they are actually just like labeling the data, kind of like study the data and then hand it back to you, kind of like help you process data. And I wonder like how do you think about like, what is the current tech stack or like AI stack the current big incumbent, not incumbent, but like big companies have, like big traditional companies have, versus like what is it what how will it evolve into like the future of the um tech
Hmm.
stack?
Yeah. So firstly, I would say the there are broad buckets for the AI stack. So I can maybe start with the bottommost layer, which is the raw processing power, which is compute, which is
Mhm,
where you have companies like NVIDIA, Lambda Labs, like many other companies that are just providing you
mhm,
the raw processing power and the compute itself. On top of that, there is the data primitives as well as cloud infrastructure, because cloud infrastructure is also evolving as these workloads are evolving. We see. I was at reInvent this last
mhm,
week. There were a lot of updates on that side in terms of like what AWS is doing on that side. But I think
mhm,
beyond what different cloud providers are doing, there's a lot that can happen as abstraction layers on top of all the cloud providers, just because a lot of enterprises are not just using one cloud, they're using
mhm,
multiple clouds. And you don't want to go through that hassle of like figuring out workloads that work across one cloud and the other cloud. And you'd rather like have it pooled around an abstraction layer. And there are interesting companies coming around that as well. On top of that is the model stack, or the
mhm,
model bucket, which is all the LLMs, which is whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic on the, I would say, on the or Cohere on the proprietary side, or companies like Mistral or Llama models coming out by Facebook. That I would say is the model layer. And on top of that is the I would say the application layer. The applications could be like literally a wrapper on top of these models. Could be doing a lot of like, I would say, RAG workflows to really train, like learn from. I wouldn't say train, but do inference on a lot of like local data that those companies have to be able to like support different use cases, whether it's customer support or whatever it might be. And then there are a lot of verticalized companies coming up. Interestingly, a lot of these verticalized companies, or at least verticalized applications that are coming on top, some of them are also building their own models, but they're not building generalized models. They're not building models at the same scale as OpenAIs of the world, and so they're not as costly. So the training cost is not as high, but they're very accurate for those specific use cases. So they're either like training their own models or they are fine tuning their own models, which doesn't make it as expensive, but at the same time also increases accuracy. One example is life sciences, where we back companies in that domain, which are creating net new protein language models that help
mhm,
do R&D in a more effective way. And then I would say that one piece of the stack, which is more like, which encompasses a lot of these layers, are the full stack applications that are that go from the model layer. Sorry, the one layer that I missed in between the application layer and the model layer is the infra layer.
mhm,
Infra layer is the tooling that people are using to deploy a lot of these applications in production. And they range from things like vector databases to orchestration layers, to AI assurance solutions, to even like model marketplaces like Hugging Face. So that's kind of the infra layer, and a lot of investments and a lot of focus from the investing community has gone into the infra layer till now, which is unprecedented compared to like when the SaaS market grew. And and then on the other side, there's a layer of full stack applications. Now these full stack applications include the model layer, the infra layer, as well as the application layer. So I would say some of these full stack applications are training generalized models, and they might not be as asset light. And so it all goes back to whether the company needs those or not. So, for example, there are code gen companies like Poolsides of the world that are doing code gen. There are, or even Devon, for example, which is cognition. There are robotics companies that are building their own full stack models. There are bio companies that are trying to build their own full stack models as well as the applications. And then there are consumer companies that we've all seen that have, some of them have been acquired, which I mentioned before, like whether it's Inflection, that have kind of built their own full stack models or applications. So those are like full stack applications. So that's how I'd see the entire stack. Now, for an organization and for the CIO, when they are trying to figure out how to introduce Gen AI in their organization, I think one part of it is really figuring out org structure, because they need to know like who's making decisions for different functions. And I've seen a lot of effective organizations really reorg to kind of figure out like who's the point person responsible for either this product or this function or this use case before they just like decide to have AI in the company. I think the one fundamental question to ask is what is the starting point, and actually what will move the needle. So it's important to know like in all your priorities, what are the top few priorities that you have as an organization, and where would AI make the most difference? That's one. The second piece of it is maturity, where like these products and solutions are more mature that kind of fit those priorities. And then when you've done both of those things and you're trying to use experimental budget to deploy some of these applications or some of these tools to your top priorities, I think it's important to monitor the ROI, because one of the things that's kind of missed out today, and it kind of ends up being an afterthought, we've tried out these solutions for a certain amount of time. We've tried it across different use cases. We just don't know what the ROI is. So I think it's important to have that kind of a workflow. We've invested in a company called WorkHelix, which is founded by the renowned Stanford professor Eric Bergolson. And WorkHelix starts by asking this question, like, where do you need to apply Gen AI, and what does your org structure look like, and where would it have the most impact? So it starts by asking that question. It helps prioritize like the top few areas where you could apply Gen AI, and then it maps it to technologies, and it suggests which technologies to adopt within the organization. It also helps track the ROI. So and it's getting adopted across multiple enterprises, multiple 500 enterprises. But I think that is a gold standard workflow that is working for customers of WorkHelix. So could be also replicated by other organizations.
I like the last example you gave about like, asking about where AI could be like most impactful. And I want to maybe like switch gear a little bit, talking about like, how you're sourcing the companies. We could use maybe Motherduck or as an example, or like any other companies in your portfolio, maybe like the protein um AI editing. So like I wonder, so how do you since like you invest in companies at the inception stage of like, before maybe you spot the talent before they start the company, what would be your sourcing funnel kind of look like beyond the generic stuff, like, people talk about, OpenAI engineer leave OpenAI or something like that. What would be the effective sourcing funnel for you? And like for the quality of the people? Would it be like people who you mentioned about Stanford professor, and there may be like other stuff? So for example, like people with um deep technical mode, like who is coming out of like a PhD lab, and then there will be also be the people who are having a lot of experiences, maybe like the first 10 employees of like $1 billion company. Like what would you say would be the most effectively like way to like help you spot the talent in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's like a constant question for us because we are trying to identify not just the best people, but also figuring
Mhm,
out how to help them identify opportunities and then
mhm,
potentially invest in those companies. So I think the model that we have is rather than actively looking at companies that are raising. Obviously, we'll look at companies that are raising as well, but a lot of the companies that we invest in end up coming from people that we've gotten to know over weeks, months, and years. And that goes back to like the different networks that we tap into, and really programmatically tracking some of those people and getting to know them, getting to know like what hard problems they're solving within those networks, and whether they are excited to do the work to figure out whether their approach is scalable beyond that construct. Whether they've spoken to enough people, and or if they are willing to speak to people outside of that organization, outside of the lab, to see what should be the shape of the product. Because a lot of times when you're solving hard problems, you are building a technology, and we want, as I mentioned before, just don't want to invest behind people who are deep technologists, but also want to invest behind people who are product thinkers. So, getting to know people and introducing them to people in our network who could be potential customers gives us an avenue to assess that piece, which is have they thought deeply about product? And I would say these people come from different walks of life. So, could be web scale companies, and a lot of my company have spun out of web scale companies, and a lot of the people that I've backed, that have spun out of web scale companies don't haven't just uh, uh, solved that problem within the web scale company, but I've also like stepped out and talked to many organizations outside and be like, is this approach even valuable for mid market? Is this approach valuable for the non web scale companies? Is it valuable for enterprises? And I think that kind of gave us the conviction. Another area is academic labs, where we've historically backed a lot of bio and AI founders.
mhm,
Uh, could be George Church's lab at Harvard, could be any of the others, and we're tracking a few of them. Could be open source maintainers. I would say before some of these projects have vanity metrics, because when you have vanity metrics on GitHub, it's easier to know like this is
mhm,
working. But before that, like why did you work on this? And the benefit of open source is that their work is out in the open to study, and you can know exactly like how they're thinking, what they're thinking. But you can't just do that like for the entire market, right? So that's why it's important to have a thesis, and we do go in with like thesis of like different areas that we're excited about. And a thesis is just a starting point because that thesis evolves over time. In thesis areas, you might feel that X, Y, or Z might change in a certain way, but you might learn from the founder's experience, and as they're exploring the market, that there could be another way to approach a problem, or there could be a new problem that we haven't thought about ourselves. So our thesis keeps evolving, but evolving the thesis is important so that like you can continue to find people that are working at the cutting edge of all those areas. Uh, so I would say like they come from those different kinds of backgrounds, and
mhm,
they're coming from this idea that we really want to learn. As investors, you want to really talk to a lot of people, really understand what their pain points are. And as you're talking to people, as you're understanding their pain points, you get to identify people who have those signals of like they could be founders and they have the ingredients to be founders. And it's not just that they are doing their full-time job and that's what they're focusing
mhm,
on. They are excited about like making a bigger impact. They're excited about building, and they're
mhm,
excited about experimentation. So I really like people who are experimenting outside of their core job with
mhm,
all of these technologies that are coming out, and they're not just limiting themselves to that core job. So I would say that those are all the areas. I think one area which is hard, which is verticalized applications where we really love to invest behind. We call it bilingual founders, which
Mhm.
is someone comes from that domain paired with someone who's deeply technical and understands how to build the technology behind it. And it's interesting. It's not that obvious to find how those people can be paired together, because let's say if you're trying to build for the legal tech space, you might have someone from the legal space who's excited to kind of solve a pain point, uh,
Mhm.
but that person may or may not be talking to the best engineers every day. So I think those kind of combinations are rare, where you find the best of breed of both sides, and they happen because of different reasons. And you kind of thought about like what could be the different
Mhm.
ways you could have those folks together, and those are more creative kind of teams, and we're excited to back those teams.
Totally. I wonder, how do you mentioned about the bilingual founders, like where would you pull the industry experts or like and then how do you kind of like do that at scale? Because I would imagine the strategy would have like, a lot of people would say, hey, yeah, I want to start a startup. And then like they try it for 2 days, they're gone. Or like they didn't really expect like after coming from like a comfortable lifestyle at like another company, they probably expect something like different sometimes like so maybe the ratio just go down. Let's say you meet 100 people, 2 people actually become a founder, right?
Yeah,
How do you kind of like also like you mentioned about the bilingual side, I was assume there's like 2 founders, one person coming from
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Yeah, so how do you make sure that like since they probably just met each other, how do you like pair them up with each other? By the way, hi Banu, just want to say hi to the audience, but keep going, sorry.
So I don't. I'd ideally prefer to invest behind people who've known each other for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Now they might know each other because of different reasons. Ideally, not like sure, like there could be exceptions where they've met recently and they've clicked, and you feel that their capabilities and their skills are very complementary, and you still might want to evaluate that. But I think people are more likely to stick together and go through highs and lows, because every company goes through highs and lows early on. If
Mm-hmm.
they've been in the trenches together. Now, being in the trenches mean that either like let's say you've come from a company which is, or you might have worked at a company that was a vertical company
Mm-hmm.
where you were more on the business side or the product side, and the co-founder today used to be on the engineering side. But they've
Mm-hmm.
actually been in the trenches together. They've worked in that company together, or they've known each other as maybe students before. They might not have worked together, but like they've been entrepreneurial in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've seen the hardships of entrepreneurship individually.
Mm-hmm.
They've not just been like uh, in only big companies, but they've kind of seen the hardships of entrepreneurship. And so they understand that if they would start a company together, even if they've not worked together, but they've known each other, they trust each
Mm-hmm.
other. I think a
Mm-hmm.
big part about starting a company together is trust. Beyond knowing how the other person works, they could still figure it out. Another interesting thing that I've also seen as a trend is a lot of like people who are technical, who might have worked in that verticalized space, or that particular space might be adjacent to them. So, for example, a lot of engineers in a company might interact with salespeople, and they might feel that building something in the sales paradigm might be an interesting opportunity. Now, they are not salespeople; they haven't been in the sales domain themselves, but that domain is adjacent to them in the organization. So they've done enough work to kind of do talk to enough people. So it's also interesting to see like some people get up to speed about a market so quickly that they become domain experts themselves. And I've seen like some people are special like that, where uh, you might not be that domain person, but you've done enough work and talked to enough people in that domain that you have more insights about that domain that people in that domain itself, because people in the domain end up being like more focused on what they're doing, so more inward focusing. So I've come across people like that, but those people are outliers. Another aspect of bilingual founders is that you could have someone pitch to a potential customer in that domain, and over time that customer gets excited to kind of join you as a co-founder. I've seen those
Mm-hmm.
instances as well. And that doesn't happen overnight, because you kind of build that relationship as a design partner, and the design partner gets excited. Oh, you're building this. I really like it. It's for my domain. I'm the domain expert, but I'd rather build this with you because I feel it's a bigger problem for the rest of the team.
Mm.
So those are like different ideas. I'm sure I'll come across an idea tomorrow, or I'll come
Mhm.
across a situation tomorrow that I haven't been in before. But at least these are like different creative situations that I've come across.
For sure. I like that, like, people have to, have some capacity of, like, knowing each other or working with each other or comfortable with the idea of, like, starting a company or, like, building a product together with another person or, like, having domain expertise, like you mentioned about the sales engineer or, like, engineer who are into sales or, like, collaborating with sales. I wanna save, like, the last part of, like, maybe we can cover one major subject and then, like, 1 minute fire round. So the major subject is, like, I like what you said about the science part. Like you mentioned about like there is a company that you invested in are doing, like I guess like in the bio full stack application space, I would assume, or like doing the protein, like leveraging AI to doing like the protein. I don't know, it's like re-editing or like editing, but like can we chat a little bit more about that? So like how do you think about the science plus AI space?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And well, first, by the way, the reason we decided to focus on life sciences and healthcare as one of the areas is also
Mhm,
because since the fund has been investing in AI for a long time, we saw like some of the early companies that we've invested in, companies like Domino Data Labs,
mhm,
sell actively into the life sciences space. And so I think that is another interesting angle or vantage point that we get, that through all the companies that we've invested in before, we get to see like which verticals
mhm,
bubble up to the top and become interesting. Now, within life sciences, obviously, one of the core aspects that we brought up earlier was it matters that you understand the science, and you're bilingual in that way, and you also understand the technology. And it's hard to find those teams. It's hard to find teams that can help build, can help apply AI to that science, because it requires a different mindset. It requires that experience as well, and it's hard to find those teams. So the company that I'd mentioned about, and the credit goes to my partner Dylan, who focuses all his efforts on life sciences and AI. Again, his model, everyone's model in the firm is similar, which is finding people before they become founders. So he got to know these researchers in George Church's lab many years back. So it was literally back in 2020, 2021 timeframe. I would say
mhm,
2020 timeframe, when
mhm,
they'd written a paper on how to apply transformers to protein structures. And the interesting thing is that protein structures are very similar to language. It's A's
mhm.
and B's, and they were able to apply transformers, and they were able to create an output of protein structures which would help in antibody design. So the idea of the company that came up was that how could you accelerate antibody design by not just applying brute force to protein structures, but being able to create a model that's able to like predict protein structures behind antibodies more effectively. And this work was initially mostly done around structures and sequences, but as you know, that proteins are not just like one dimensional. I would say proteins are also multimodal in many ways, in the way they interact with other molecules, in the way their 3D structures look like. So the initial work was done more around the structure piece of it, which was more text. I would say the text of, or the language of proteins. But over time, they've been able to like expand that to multimodal, where now they take into account all different dimensions of the protein, and they're able to like both help the pharma companies create antibodies as well as create antibodies themselves, and take it to pharma companies directly. So there are like two different models, right? Like one model for pharma is a milestone based model where you help them create the drug, and with every milestone you get paid. The other model with pharma is that you don't go through that workflow, but if you have enough confidence and your product works, then you should be able to create you should be able to create the target yourself. You should create the drug yourself, and you can take it to pharma directly. Now we're not taking on any of the IND process, so we're not taking it through FDA. The pharma company can take it to the FDA, but at least it short circuits the product development life cycle, where today in pharma it takes 10 years to develop a drug, or 10 plus years in many cases. But if you're able to accelerate this entire workflow of target identification, target discovery, target identification, and selection, which itself takes a long time, then that itself is a big jump for drug development, and that's what we're excited about.
Totally. Okay, so although I have so many different topics we could keep covering, but I want to be mindful of the time. So I want to end with a 1-minute fire round for you. So first question is what's your favorite book?
Favorite book? I have so many of them.
Oh God.
Can't name one.
What is the book that you recently read that you felt wow, that was really interesting?
I went back to read Animal Farm again by George Orwell.
Oh wow.
So it means differently in today's world. So I would suggest I love that book.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
To my dinner party?
Yeah.
Aspirational or actual?
Well, it's your party.
I would love to I'd love to talk to Sam Altman if he's willing to come.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say have to say it's my mom, because she's a mathematician. I learned the fundamentals of math from her, and that's what took me to IIT, and that's why.
Oh wow. Does your mom teach in math, or what does? Yeah.
She teaches math. Yeah.
Oh wow. I feel like math is the foundation of every kind of science.
Yeah.
It's very abstract, but on the other hand, it's it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Where can we find you outside of work?
You could find me playing with my kids in a park.
Amazing. I would ask which park, but I don't want to get into details for the rest of the universe, so that maybe you would expect people to show up there. But anyway, so Apoorva, thank you so much for coming to the show today. It was a fun chat.
Thank you for having me.
Let me quickly end stream.